Welcome everyone to the latest Burke Neurological Institute Science Fuels Hope webinar. Our topic today is raising disability awareness. And we'll have the opportunity to talk with three incredible panelists, each of whom are leading significant efforts to help improve the lives of people with disabilities. My name is Terry Preskar, and I'm very honored and proud to serve on the board of the Burke Neurological Institute. BNI is the only research institution in the United States that's dedicated to finding treatments that repair the brain and spinal cord. Located in White Plains, New York, BNI is an independent neuro repair and research arm of Weill Cornell Medicine with a mission to help people walk, talk, see, and remember again. Following the panel discussion, we'll open the floor to questions from the audience. So please submit your questions via the chat function in Zoom. And also, please make sure your microphones are off and turn your cameras on if you feel comfortable with that, because we would like to see all your smiling faces. And now, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First up is Dr. Kathleen Friel. Dr. Friel is the director of the Clinical Laboratory for Early Brain Injury Recovery at the Burke Neurological Institute, and she is an associate professor of Weill Cornell Medicine. Dr. Friel's lab aims to improve hand function in children and adults living with cerebral palsy. Their research focuses on the importance of motor activity in neurorehabilitation. Dr. Friel received the National CP Awareness Research Award in 2021. And last month, in a summer camp-like atmosphere at BNI, the Friel Lab hosted kids with cerebral palsy for an NIH-funded clinical trial designed to boost hand function. Dr. Friel will share her professional perspective with us as a leader in the field of CP research and her personal perspective as a person with CP. Thanks for joining us today, Dr. Friel. Kathleen, your microphone's on. There you go.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm Kathleen. I'm White Woman. Daughter and very incredible research.
It's great to have you here today.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor.
Good. Okay. And next, please help me welcome Ms. Xian Horn. Ms. Horn describes herself as a joyful, half-Asian woman with cerebral palsy. She's the founder of the nonprofit Give Beauty Wings, and Ariana Huffington's and the Change Blazer Consultancy, sorry. She's also a highly successful advocate for the disabled community. Ms. Horn is a freelance journalist at Forbes Women and Ariana Huffington's Thrive Global. She's also a blogger for Positively Positive, a community with over 2.5 million readers. Xian has spoken at the United Nations and to many major companies, including Microsoft and Apple. And she's been featured on NPR, in Forbes, Fortune, Fast Company, and on most of the major news networks. Welcome, Xian. We are honored and delighted that you could join us today.
What an introduction, and it's so amazing. Thank you to Kathleen for thinking of me for this panel and to BNI for welcoming me. Just a quick description, you mentioned the half Asian part, so I can skip that. But basically, I'm a smiley woman with long hair wearing white today. So really excited to be here. Also, my pronouns are she and her, in case anybody wanted to know.
Thank you. Thanks. And our final panelist is Tom Hamilton. Tom and his wife Karen founded the Cure FA Foundation after their daughter Annie was diagnosed with Friedreich's ataxia at the age of 9. Cure FA has sponsored the Center of Excellence for FA the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and the FA Accelerator at the Broad Institute. Tom and Karen also serve on the board of the Friedreich's Ataxia Research Alliance. Friedreich's ataxia is a rare genetic neuromuscular disease that causes difficulty walking, a loss of sensation in the arms and legs, and impaired vision, hearing, and speech. Now at the age of 17, Annie Hamilton has been a source of inspiration at BNI, where she frequently can be seen using the exobionic skeleton to keep her muscles strong. Annie will be dearly missed in the halls at BNI when she heads off to Notre Dame this fall. Welcome so much, Tom.
Thanks so much for having me. The intro sounds so dramatic, but BNI is doing a lot more for patients than I am. So I appreciate being a part of this. I look forward to the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, then, let's just dive right in. I'd like to direct the first question of our discussion today to Dr. Friel. I think that most Americans, like me naively, believe that the passing of the American Disabilities Act in 1990, 32 years ago this month, addressed the needs of the disabled in our country. What's the truth of the situation, Dr. Friel?
Thank you for the question. So the ADA was passed with the goal of making America accessible to all. And in many ways, this has happened. So many more places are accessible than before 1990. Unfortunately, the ADA is very difficult to enforce, and a lot of places just either don't comply or it's actually more difficult for us. For example, some restaurants might have an accessible entrance, but you have to walk around the park to get to that entrance. So there are a definite number of huge changes that occurred, but there still is a lot more to do. One example is the New York City subway system just promised to be almost fully accessible, and the target date is 2055. So like 50, like what is that, 20 anymore? I can't do that. A lot of years until like what's that about? So there's different challenges.
2055, that's quite the timeline to comply with a law passed 32 years ago.
Can't wait.
Xian, you live in New York City. You were born there, correct?
That's right.
What's your perspective on the state of compliance with the ADA?
Well, I'm always pushing people to go way beyond compliance because it's ultimately about, I think all inclusion is about making a place welcoming. So you can have all the bells and whistles of the technical stuff. So for example, putting a ramp in, I was just telling someone that I went to one of the CUNY colleges and they had the ramp across 2 sets of stairs. You had to, and if you're in a chair, maybe you can, motor past it. But for someone with a mobility, I should have mentioned too that I traverse the world with 2 ski poles as adaptive equipment for me to, I need it for balance. And so one of the greatest and since a child, I fall on a regular basis. So a set of stairs like that, I am very scared to, traverse across, because I could fall down those stairs as I'm trying to get to a ramp. It seems very counterintuitive. So in terms, and going back to subway, I have not been on a subway in probably 15 to 20 years, because the last time I tried to go, my mother reminded me I had a crossbody bag on, and for some reason, it's different than the city bus, for example, where there is at least a blue section that people know this is where people with disabilities or the elderly, will sit no matter what. There's kind of, people may be a little bit impatient, but they know they have to wait and let somebody on. And there's kind of an etiquette or a cultural norm already set up in terms of welcome. I mean, it's not a perfect system, but at least it's there. With the subway, I've always felt like I would be trampled. And so there was sort of the running of the bulls moment. And then my crossbody bag slipped down my body as I was trying to rush. And my mom said, that's the last time that we ever took the subway, because I realized it's incredibly dangerous for you. So everybody always asks for accessible elevators. And I believe that's a start. But even if every accessible elevator, and the fact that I will be a senior when that happens is really, I cannot believe it. That's not great news. And, I was just at the mayor's house for the ADA, and they didn't mention the year, because I think they know. They said, great news, we're making all the, it will be all accessible, but they didn't mention the year. And I think that means even the city knows it's not really a great timeline. So there's so much to discuss here. We could make a whole hour about transportation. And one of the things that I did fight for, just to finish up, before the pandemic, they were trying to cut a program that they created through Accessori that would make same-day travel possible through yellow cabs. And they were trying to cut that down. There was only 1,200 of us on the pilot. What I'd love to see is that pilot expanded, but actually what they were trying to do is cut that down to 8 rides per month. So you could only be spontaneous 8 times a month. I couldn't imagine a city where we said to subway riders, you have to book your subway 24 hours in advance. That would never happen. And so there's much more inequity still. But going back to the ADA for a second, somebody asked me what it means to me on the birth of this legislation. And I think the most important thing is that it created a foundation and a springboard for all the work that's ahead. So I think it's a great starting point, but we have so much to do, as we know. So,
Tom, you have school-age kids, as we've talked about. Do you have a perspective from compliance and access and issues in the school systems?
So yeah, I have a couple things. So the first thing I'd say before I go into the detail is, we've been lucky enough to travel out of the country quite a bit. And for all the bad things, and we always want better accessibility, the United States is the best place in the world for a disabled person. I mean, there's no comparison. You can't go anywhere in the world and get what you get here. So every time I get mad, I try to balance myself with a little bit of gratitude that I live here, because it's unbelievable if you go somewhere else and you have nothing, and it's really bad elsewhere. So I'd start with that. Second thing I'd say is, I agree with with the previous 2 sets of comments, in that it's the spirit of the act. And when I say that, I mean, yeah, you have a handicapped parking space, but if there's a car right next to you, you can't get your wheelchair out the side. So it's not accessible at all, right? Or like when we went on college visits with my daughter, they say, yeah, the university is fully accessible. Well, having to, traverse in your wheelchair around to the back and go up a ramp that's too steep through a garbage dump into the building, by the letter of the law, that's accessible, but as a human being, that's not really accessible. So I think there's nuances, that need to be addressed, and it's, to me, it's the spirit of the act being followed is much more important than the letter of the law being followed, because some of the rules just don't, accessibility is, if you follow the rules, and it's not really accessible, but I agree that, listen, it's a springboard for better things. We have to keep fighting for more accessibility, and 2055 or whatever it is a long time away, but let's not forget we're centuries above other countries, and we have to keep pushing for it, and I agree, and I'm on that team, but I try to balance it, because as all of you know, like, you can get really upset when someone's in your handicap spot that's not handicapped, so I have to check myself. Anyways, I'll stop because I know there's a lot.
No. So I am a very practical person by nature. This opens my eyes to, when I go anywhere, to be looking and assessing what access there would be for somebody with disabilities. If any of us, hopefully everyone will do that. And if we notice in our local towns and communities, difficult to change the government of New York City or the federal government as a single individual, but in the places that we live and the businesses that we frequent, if we notice issues, what would you suggest we do? Who do we raise awareness with in that moment? Xian, I'm gonna put you on the spot. What do you think?
Well, do you mean in terms of how do we address leadership?
And even just highlight for people or businesses or our local governments who have the ability to take action.
Well, I think, I think it takes a real deep dive into what allyship really is, which is, I think, deep listening. A lot of people, that have really good intentions or think that they're on board will get very defensive when you have feedback, because because intentions are good, but intentions are a great start. But it also is, what happens when you give that feedback and say, hey, this really wasn't accessible, we need more chairs next year, or whatever it was. We want to see that corresponding action, or at least some willingness to take action. And so I think also in terms of leadership is getting more people with disabilities in positions of leadership, and not just have it be a situation of non-disabled people making access for disabled people. I think, any community, it requires all of us. So involve us in the creation process so that we don't have to retrofit. Retrofitting is way more expensive than getting that expertise, listening while you're creating something, and working together to make it the best it can be.
Great, thank you. Okay, so support from family and friends is critical for all of us, as we learned during the pandemic, but especially critical for the disabled community. Tom, you and your wife, Karen, have raised an exceptional daughter and other exceptional children as well, I'm sure. But with Annie heading off to Notre Dame this fall, what advice would you give to the parents of a disabled child?
Well, I mean, I have plenty of advice for other people, but if I'm honest, I should have followed more of it myself. The advice that the hardest thing for a parent to do, and yet the best thing you can do for the child, is enable them to do as much as they can on their own, right? I mean, as a parent, your immediate reaction is to relieve pain of your child at any moment you can, right? Whether it's putting on her shoe or helping her brush teeth or whatever. You think you're helping by doing some of these things, and really in the long run, you're making them less independent and less having less pride and allowing them to feel different about themselves. So, I think for me anyways, the cardinal rule is don't do a thing for them that they can almost do for themselves. Not, force them to try. And, listen, you don't let them struggle too much, but let them struggle a little bit. I have 3 non-disabled children. I let them struggle all the time. Well, why don't I let my daughter who's in a wheelchair struggle a little bit too? So it's listen, it's an easy thing to say and a really difficult thing to do as a parent. And I'm guilty continually of doing too much for my daughter, but I try. I try. I also think, and it kind of goes into the last question as well, is, inclusivity is, whether you're talking about, race or sexual orientation or whatever, disability is the same way, right? The more people who have jobs who are disabled, the more people in leadership positions who are disabled, the more you raise your child to know and feel like they can do what everybody else can do to get into these positions is helping everyone, not just your child, right? So not having disabled people in the fabric of decision-making, in the workforce, working in nonprofits, whatever it might be, the more people who are disabled who feel empowered to be in these positions, the better it's going to be for everybody. And I think that's true for inclusivity, regardless of how you're looking at it. And I'm not sure disability is all that different from the others.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. I am going to put some special guests on the spot right now. And this is a surprise, but we happen to have Dr. Friel's parents here with us today. And so if you wouldn't mind, Pat's iPhone, if you could take your microphone off mute, if you have any thoughts you'd like to share with us and advice to other parents of a disabled child, what would you like to share?
Oh, where to begin? Basically, I would say I personally agree with Tom, is to do as much as possible to help your child be independent is critical, and as he also said, it's extraordinarily difficult to do on a regular basis. It involves lots of tears and tantrums and all kinds of things, but I think that at least some of the decisions that my husband and I made when Kathleen was little and growing enabled her to live the independent life that she lives now. And that she is one of those people that Tom was talking about, a person with a disability who is in a position of leadership and a position to influence other people. I also think that when we talk about accessibility, people in general tend to think ramps and elevators and, and those kinds of things. Whereas I think some of the greatest challenges that Kathleen faced growing up and still faces as an adult with disability is the attitudinal accessibility that is often lacking. That she is not considered to be as competent, as intelligent, as whatever, pick your adjective, as folks without disabilities. And this causes a great deal of pain and hurt, and it's a loss for society when the gifts of folks with disabilities are not even assumed to be there, much less accepted and honored and used for the benefit of the community. Kevin, you have anything to add?
What she said. we were pre-ADA parents, so a lot of the things that we were able to accomplish with Kathleen, we had to fight in court. We had to fight in court to mainstream her in public school. We had to fight in court to get benefits, to get therapy, to get different things. So it was a little harder than it is now, but we're just glad that things are going in the right direction. They're certainly not where they need to be, but it's a start.
Well, you certainly passed that fighting spirit on to your daughter. And I've seen many quotes where she inspires and challenges other folks with disabilities to take satisfaction in proving those doubters wrong. And I think holding on to that attitude is a wonderful idea. Thank you so much. Sorry to put you on the spot, but that was wonderful. Kathleen, would you like to add anything?
Well, first of all, thank you, Mom and Dad. I mean, yeah, I know. I mean, like Tom said, it must have been hard to see me struggle, but yeah, that's how I learn things. And like Tom said, and even in the therapies that we do, BNI, that part of what we encourage kids is to struggle, to do things that they can't do or can't do very well, and work on that. And yeah, I definitely think that I mean, for me, I felt like growing up, it was just assumed that I would be like a regular kid, like go to the regular school, at the time, I didn't fully appreciate the legal action that was required just to let me go to school. But after the school let me in, they put me in a class of kids with learning disabilities because, without testing me, they just assumed that I had a learning disability. And I felt like I am often, judged because of how I talk and walk. But yeah, I love, moving people along. Yeah, that's what I thought. One of the coolest things is like when I started going to conferences as a scientist, and the conferences we were these giant badges, and it would say, Dr. Kathleen, and people would like stare like oh, like, dude, come on, like, I didn't, like, this is important, like, come on. So, even in the scientific community, there is a lot of assumptions about, people with disabilities, and, so there is a lot more to do. And we've done a lot also. So.
And you continue to be a source of inspiration every single day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Xian, is there anything you'd like to add in terms of the importance of support from friends and family in your social networks?
I always start with this because I believe that there's two reasons that I've called my disability the blessing of my life so far. And one of them, I think, is to Tom's point that, the ADA, as much as there's so much work to be done, I grew up knowing that I could cut the lines at Disney World, the airport, and having two shiny ski poles, it meant people didn't forget me. So I saw that, but also one of the reasons I was able to embrace it I think from a very young age, there were some layers of denial in terms of, I think in order to connect with others, I would often downplay those things that made me different so I could connect with my friends at school and things like that. But my parents being artists, they really prized the uniqueness in me and celebrated that. And being an only child, I got all this love. And so I feel it's my duty to give that love back and be that love and support that others may not have had. But a perfect example that shows, and I didn't think this was revolutionary at the time, but when I switched from walker to ski pole, my dad had my old walker and my parents were going to go on a ski trip that they wanted to bring me on. And so he had this idea. He brought the walker to the ski shop and said, hey, can you put a set of skis on this thing? And the guy was so touched by what he was doing, he did it for free. And then my parents took turns pushing me up and down the slopes. I fell all over the place. I was screaming with joy. It wasn't about being the best skier out there, but this is why when I wanted to be a ballerina, for example, I walked on my tippy toes till I was 8. And also had my feet wrapped in an early intervention to try and lift my arches. So I had my feet wrapped every day and I was on tippy toes. So I figured ballerina was the next step. But when I wanted to be a ballerina, they just said, hey, okay. So they got me 2 years in a row. I was a ballerina for Halloween. They never said, oh, Xian, we need to talk about other career options for you. That's never going to happen. They just let me be a kid. They let me dream. And because of that, I didn't have a lot of even when outside forces tried to impose certain ideas, I always rejected it because I knew what my disability was for me and my CP belongs to me. And I wanted to bring that. I realized that was not how everybody grew up. But that's one of the reasons why I became an advocate. It was not a plan, but when I realized that for so many people, it's a life or death thing, how they feel about themselves on a self-esteem level, but also especially around disability, seeing my friends and colleagues who are the most beautiful people I've ever met struggling in this way really bothered me. And so I wanted to share some of what my parents gave to me and what are the good, asking that questions, what's the best thing about having a disability, that kind of thing. So yeah, there's a lot to say here. I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, switching gears a little bit, but the your mention of self-esteem and how important it is, the clothes that we wear, all of us, right, can be a very important form of self-expression, a source of confidence. Xian, you worked with the Open Style Lab at the Parsons School of Design on designer Anna Sui to create a line of adaptive clothing. Can you tell us why this was an important priority for you?
Well, I want to clarify that I've never created an adaptive line myself. What happened was I started with Open Style Lab, as you mentioned, and I had 6 women creating a custom coat for me because I said to the founder of OSL, Grace, it was raining that day. And I traverse the world with those 2 poles. And so it's hard for me to carry an umbrella. So I said, it's raining today and I can't carry an umbrella. Grace, can you create a coat for me that doesn't look like a Disneyland poncho, something I can wear to speaking engagements, something, where that's a bit more professional looking. And so 6 students created a custom coat for me. And it's so interesting, and this is why I believe in collaborative innovation, why it's so important, is that they followed me around for, a day and a half. And at one point they said, we want to watch you put your coat on. We want to see how you do it. And because I traverse the world, holding my poles, I have to often, in order to put on my own coat, I have to be seated to do it. So I was seated and I was putting the coat on. And something that always happened is that it would get caught on the back of my chair, something that I just always would wriggle out of and not think about. So it wasn't even something I asked them for, but they noticed that. So they created a higher coat tail in the coat so that wouldn't happen anymore. And that was eye-opening for me to realize that, yes, it was their job to hear what my needs were, but they anticipated needs that I didn't even know I had.
Mhm.
And so that's why we're always better when we work together. And so from that, I then got to do Design for Disability, where we worked with Anna Swee. But
Mhm.
yes, but most of the projects that I've been a part of were more couture or custom. And it made me realize, like, who doesn't want something couture, right? But
Right.
also that our bodies are so different that, I mean, it may be difficult to have. And what a privilege I had in order to have that experience, not only once, but 3 times, was quite amazing. But I mean, I think why it's so important for people with disabilities is more than just even identity making and socialization. It's also employment. I think a lot of times with the adaptive fashion or the universal design that exists, it tends to focus on kids. And the truth is, I think most kids look cute in a paper bag. I don't think it's as important for children as it is for us as adults. I'm not saying it's not important for kids, but I'm saying one area that I'm constantly pushing for is for the job seekers. And when you're a teenager or an adult, I think fashion becomes even more important than when you're a kid, right? So that's something I'd like to see more of. And especially, I want to just take a moment to say, please make more shoes for us that are comfortable and beautiful, right? People don't just buy an iPhone because they want to make phone calls. There's a sleek factor, there's a sexy factor, and there's no reason that Design for Disability can't be the same. So thank you for that question, Meaty.
It sounds like there's a huge business opportunity out there for any motivated person. A wonderful, wonderful need. And I see in the chat, and someone said, and for makeup as well. And there's Guide Beauty is listed as an example of a good resource. So I don't know, Tom, if Annie's into makeup, you might want to write that down.
Yeah, I am gonna write it down.
Excellent, excellent. Kathleen, did you want to make any comments about fashion, clothing?
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna add. So, I, maybe about 5 years ago, a teenager was sitting wrote to Nike, the sneaker shop, and said, "Well, I need shoes that are like look cool and I can put on myself." So Nike has an adaptive line
Oh, they
now.
do.
Yeah, they are sneakers. So I have some that are all black, so I can wear them to work. But yeah, I agree there. Other kinds of shoes
Mhm.
are very hard for me to wear those to like dress shoes. I just can't. They hurt after
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
a very short time. So yeah, I agree that there needs to be a lot more done. But I am happy to see that some companies are doing right. Who's Tommy Hilfiger has quite a few adaptive clothing pieces. But yeah, I think there needs to be more. And I also think that yeah, when we say adaptive, it just means it's easier to put on. And even people without disabilities might benefit from it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very good to hear and to understand that companies like Nike and Tommy Hilfiger are doing things that I certainly wasn't aware of. And let's hope that more companies follow in their footsteps.
Yeah.
Tom, do you want to comment on fashion?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm forced to. So I agree with Kathleen in that, we use a lot of Nike shoes and they've done a great job of making them again, I think Kathleen's right. It's like, they're not necessarily accessible. They're just easier to use, right? Whether they have zippers around the back or zippers around the front. And it's funny to me that they started this, you know, with the idea of being for accessible people. And I would venture to say that it's going to drift to all of their shoes, right? The shoe, you know, my daughter wears AFOs, which is it's harder for her to get them on. And, you know, there's all sorts of other issues around it, but, you know, the zippers help, and it just makes things easier in general. Listen, I know my daughter would love to have, you know, other shoes, like Xian says, you know, that are fashion worthy. You know, it's a bit sad, you know, when I think about it. She's at a point now where she's just resigned that I just wear sneakers with everything. And, you know, it's unfortunate, you know, it's sad. And listen, yeah, she tries, like, we'll take her AFOs off, she'll put on sandals, like it's a challenge, right? And, you know, but you also have to realize for her, she's, you know, the trade-off is, am I going to wear my AFOs and be able to transfer to the bathroom? Or am I going to wear sandals and look nice? It's not, you know, it's prisoner's dilemma. Like, who wants to have that decision, right?
Right.
So it's a tough one for me looking from the outside, and I'm sad for her that she's kind of resigned to sneakers. And, you know, I'd love a better solution. I'm realistically, I'm not sure there is a great one for her. We keep trying, you know, it's not like we've given up, but, you know, we have a closet full of shoes that don't work, you know. So.
Wow. Well,
we have to keep fighting, you know.
No,
absolutely.
Listen, I agree. You know,
have to make that choice. Yeah.
I agree, you know, but I'm just trying to, like, interpret what, if Annie was here, what she'd say is I think what she would say is, I got 20 things to fight for. This is just it's not a top 10 for me. So I'm going to work on something else. That doesn't mean it isn't for other people, right? Like, I mean, she's got to make decisions every day as to where am I going to spend my energy. And I don't feel like I'm the person to make that choice or even influence that choice. Like, you tell me what your choice is and I'll try and help you.
Right. But it does illustrate the power of these smaller things. Yeah, and what a positive difference they could make, right? If there were a choice. Yeah.
Very meaningful. I agree with that. Like, I'm not trying to downplay the importance of fashion at all. That's not what I'm saying. Like,
right. No, not
her
at
getting
all.
Dresses off. Like, she, you know, if there's a dress and she's got a zip in a certain place, like, it's like she's got a straitjacket up, you know, like, if there's not two people there to help her, it's not coming off or on. So, you know, it's challenging.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. The next question is for all three of you. So it's putting you on the spot to say, what action can people take to help improve this situation? So for the participants here today, what do you want us to know or do when we leave this webinar today? If there was one thing that each of us could do, what would it be? Xian, maybe you could start.
Well, I think one of the things that I wish everybody has power. It might not be as much as the person next to us. Everybody can do something. And I think what I'd like people to know that are non-disabled is that you have something to contribute to improve the lives of people with disabilities as well. Whether you're a parent of a person with a disability or have a disability, that's not the only onus that, you know, I think we're all humanists, hopefully, right? And I think, you know, if I were to share anything, it's to know that, like, you can be an ally. And if you don't know enough, then that's a perfect starting point to get to know. So, you know, watch films from Real Abilities. There are a lot of firsthand accounts of disability experiences. And yes, every story, you know, the stories that Kathleen and I share, those are individual stories. But, you know, let's get learning about each other. I want to learn about all of humanity myself too. I don't just want to serve people with disabilities. So I think what I want people to know is there is something you can do, whether you don't have to be in fashion. to advocate for adaptive fashion. You don't have to be in transportation to advocate for transportation. There is something you can do. And maybe it just starts with, you know, learning more about the situation so that you can be more informed, learning about language so you can say, well, we don't use the word handicapped anymore. That was, you know, we don't, you know, unless we're referring to a physical space like a handicapped parking space or the bathroom, we do not, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. And everybody, you know, has something that we can do. So, so that makes me hopeful, but I just, you know, as you're listening to this, if you're saying, well, I'm not a parent of somebody with a disability, or I'm not disabled, therefore I can just listen and that's it. But that's actually an act of activism as well, if you're really hearing us. So I would say, really listen, and where possible, let's take action in the space that we hold. We may not all have the same amount of privilege, but we can use our privilege. You know, I've been privileged in love, for example. That's why I want to give more of it out. So we can use what privilege we've had and start from there and make space for others who may not be there, who should be there.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a very long answer, but there's a lot
No,
to
it's
unpack.
very good. Very good. Kathleen, how about you?
I totally agree with Sean. I think the main, if there is one thing I can add, is that people just listen to our stories. And yeah, like Sean said, learn from one another, because I feel like when people who are not disabled, when they understand what high numbers, deal with on a daily basis, I feel like that motivates them to join the advocacy. So I feel like listening is key, because I also feel like in some spaces, people who don't have disabilities might come up with solutions for us that don't make any sense at all. And then they spend the money, they build whatever they built that doesn't work. And then they say, oh, why you that? I did all this for you. It's like, no, if you just listen, that would be I think a really, really good start.
Listen.
yeah.
Okay. Yep. Just listen. Good advice, no matter what, right? Too many of us don't. Tom, how about you?
You know, I think it's a theme of everything we've been saying, in that I think what people can do is just, I think two things, just in general, have a higher awareness of what's happening. You know, I don't, you know, and I'm probably guilty of it. Before my daughter was disabled, you know, my daughter declined over time and she has a degenerative disorder. So when my daughter was 7, was I conscious about how close I parked next to the disabled parking spot? Was I aware of these things? I was not, right? If I'm honest with myself. So having a heightened awareness to what's going on and how people need various accommodations to be included, I think that sensitivity is just something that's really important to the community. And I think it makes everybody better, right? It's not about, you know, oh, I'm helping the disabled person. You're just making the world a nicer place, right? Just be kind, right? Like it's interesting, when we went around and looked at schools for my daughter, and we went to ones that said, oh, we're fully disabled, we're fully accessible, and ones that weren't. And, you know, her decision came down to the place that was kindest. She's like, Dad, I felt like people cared about me when I was there. everyone opened the door, not just for her, for everyone. She wasn't different, right? She was accepted as a member of the community, and people were just kind to her. So that's what made the decision, not that they had a better ramp, you know.
Okay, thanks. I feel like we may have covered this in what we just did, but before we open up the discussion to questions from the audience, I just wanted to give each of you a chance to share a final thought with us today, if you have one. So anybody want to start?
I can say, I mean, first, I just want to say thank you, because by being here, we're already committed to raising awareness, and public awareness. So, yeah, I would just say thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
I agree with Kathleen. I mean, there's 50, I can't see 55 people on this call or something like that. I mean, you're on the way, right? I mean, the fact that you've taken 90 minutes of your Friday morning to listen to this, to me, is like, I'm really thankful for that. Like, that's so kind, and you're already halfway there. So really appreciate you being open to listening to this kind of discussion.
I would just love to agree with Tom that, just being here is an act of allyship. I'm just so, and even giving us this space. So I want to thank, BNI for inviting us, because, by giving us a space on this panel, fostering these discussions, this is bigger than just Pride Month, right? And that's another thing I hope people take out of this, is that, whatever our differences may be, let's not just celebrate people with disabilities on Pride Month or Employment Awareness Month or any of the buzzwords, just like we don't want to celebrate women only in March, right? So I think let's start with a hopeful note that I do believe that all the things that we're wishing for are going to happen. But as we learned with the subway, some of these things are not happening fast enough. So whatever we can do together to be catalysts, I just want to honor and celebrate that, because I'm really hopeful, but at the same time, there's things we can do to move progress along, and I'm very excited to see what's next.
Thank you all so much. Now, I'm going to turn things over to Christine Hughes. Christine is the VP of Institutional Advancement for BNI, and she's been collecting all the questions from the audience that you submitted over the chat during the panel discussions. So Christine, what does our audience want to know?
Well, hi everyone, and thank you. This has been so wonderful. This has been really fantastic. I actually have a question that I'd like to start off with, if you guys don't mind. So I would like to host a dinner party, and I would like to invite Kathleen and her family, and Xian and her family, and Tom and his family. I live in a raised ranch where you have steps that go up and steps that go down. How do I invite? What do I do? How do I make my home accessible and have my dear friends over to break bread? And I would love to hear from the panelists.
Well, I can tell you from my perspective, the fact that you're aware that there's a need for them to get in your house is the first step. Annie will get invited places, and it hasn't even crossed their mind how she's getting to where she needs to be, which is just, it's a bit, listen, I don't want to judge anybody about their sensitivity or not, but the fact that you're sensitive enough to know that. And for me, all you need to do is let me know. I'd love to have you over. By the way, I've got 3 steps. I don't know if you can traverse it or not. What can I do to help? And my answer would be, no worries. I have a 5-foot ramp I can throw in my car, and I'll make it work. Thanks so much for thinking of us. That would be my response. And that would be so fine to me, right? The burden isn't necessarily on you, right? It's the It's you being aware and sensitive to the fact that there's a need. That doesn't mean you have to fill the need, but you're aware and express it.
Okay to me, and I was like,
Good.
okay.
I would love to jump in here, Tom, and kind of say, I actually, you gave me an idea, because I've never thought to bring my own ramp. But on the other hand, I kind of gently disagree with you that it's not on, because I think that's part of the problem, is that it's always been on us to make that. When I was growing up, it's like whoever was different, you have to adjust to that environment. It's not up to the environment to welcome you. And so I would just really, I totally respect where you're coming from. And I think it's really proactive and cool that you have your own ramp. But I don't think that, I don't know what you think, Kathleen, but I don't think that I should have to bring a ramp. Obviously, if I have one, then great. But, I also think I want to echo that the fact that you're asking this question means you are thoughtful and you've already realized that there's an issue. There's a lot of different ways, maybe, working to make your entrance more level, but obviously that costs money. And I understand that people don't do that. I can do stairs. So oftentimes I will just do the stairs. But I think that, I think it should be on both sides. If I have a ramp, then it is my responsibility to bring that. However, I don't think that we should say it's not on people. I think in an individual's home, it's different. It's not a public place. You know what I mean?
Well, I think that is the distinction, right? I mean, there's a degree of reasonableness on what you can expect, right? So I think if someone invites you to their home, okay, I don't expect you to install a ramp for me to come for dinner, right? So, but you're right. All public places and restaurants, I totally agree. I don't know where the line is, and I agree with you. I want people to do more, right? And I want them to participate. I wish I knew how to manage that line better. And I don't think we do. There's no right answer, right?
Right. And I think what I'm saying is I think it's on both sides. It should be on both sides. And it doesn't mean even me in the apartment that my mom was pregnant when she came here. Okay. And there's a little step in the front, and we have a rent stabilized situation. So we don't want to leave, but it is true that I can invite my friends in wheelchairs. I have one friend that literally the doorman will actually lift her chair to bring her in, and I feel bad every time. So what do? I meet my friends in wheelchairs in places that are more accessible for them. So that's the way that I take that responsibility, because I can't rebuild my entire building and I can't find rent stabilized apartments, so it's not, no, so this is not to call anyone out, but this is just to say that I think there are ways around it. Maybe you meet somewhere else that is more accessible if your house is not built for that, or you can't afford to retrofit it, or whatever it is. There's always a way. And I think when you have two willing parties, and just even asking that question, you're a willing party, then you'll find a way. But I think, yeah, it is good. Next time, when the next house you buy, you might be more cognizant of that. And that's great.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think it's, both parties need to be aware. Yeah, it is so good that you would even think to ask. So for me personally, I can do stairs. But I get tired. So a few stairs up and down, I can manage. And maybe so I don't walk with any assisted device, but for the ice and snow, I have a cane. So maybe if there's gonna be a lot of stairs, I bring that. And one of the other issue that Tom brought up with Amy is that I find myself really sometimes having to choose how to spend my energy. So yeah, a certain energy for day. And oftentimes people with disabilities need to be very careful about how we spend our energy. And one of the things that sometimes throws me for a loop is if I have to do something physical, like say climb up like a whole flight of stairs, for example, which at the end of the day, yeah, might not be easy. So if I knew in advance that there are some stairs, then I would conserve a little bit more energy so that when I am there, yeah, I don't like get exhausted by whatever whatever I need to do. Yeah, I also need to yeah, if somebody's home just isn't accessible, meeting someone else and making sure that place is accessible is a good alternative.
I just wanted to say that the three of you listening to you really made me think. And what I realized as you were talking, you can pull into my driveway and I have very flat landscape that goes from the driveway to the backyard. The backyard is flat and no steps to come in to use. There's a bathroom on this floor. So you just help me to figure out how I'm going to have this great dinner party and invite you guys all, and everyone's going to be comfortable and have a great time. And I'll wear my sneakers.
We're all going to Christine's
We're
house.
all going.
Yeah, we're all going. We're all going, aren't we, Christine?
going.
So can you fit 50 people back there? Because we're
Oh,
all
yeah.
coming.
Sure, no problem. We got it. The next thing I wanted to ask, just because I felt like, because BNI is sponsoring this, and you know, our mission every day is to work with people with disabilities and to really try to you know, to help families and patients as best we can. And this has been so informative and fantastic. But I just wanted to quickly, because I feel like we're sharing resources here, and we're sharing resources about, you know, how to be advocates, how to find accessible clothes, but also too, I feel like a resource, BNI can be a resource. And there are lots of the audience members who have shared in the chat that they have neurologically based disabilities. That's the space we operate in. And I just maybe wanted to ask Kathleen and Tom, because I know you've had experience, obviously Kathleen works at the Institute, but maybe talk a little bit about, you know, how can BNI be a resource for folks with disabilities, patients and families? How can we help?
Yeah, it's a very good. I think that by being fully accessible will be a big help. And by like creating welcoming areas for people with disabilities when I come to the institute will be really wonderful. And yeah, and we're always trying to develop more studies that can include more people. So I really think that we can serve as a resource to people with disabilities in terms of the clinical research that we do.
Tom?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, we found BNI through kind of an odd route. And I think this is probably endemic of a lot of neurological disorders, in that, you know, a lot of brain / neurology type clinics, it's stroke and spinal cord injury, right? And it's just the law of numbers, right? That's what the lion's share of the people, you could serve the most people by addressing those issues. I just think it was great, at least from my personal experience, that BNI was open to dealing with something outside of brain and spinal cord, right? And I think there's probably a room at the Institute to, make people more aware of that, right? There's plenty of neurological problems, right? And they're all not spinal cord and traumatic brain injury or stroke, right? So making people more aware of that has been helpful. And I think, and I experienced that personally. So, but I'm just not sure that it's broadcast as loudly as it could be, because they can do a lot of things for a lot of people, not just stroke and spinal cord.
And Xian, maybe you have a view on this. How can places like for the Burke Neurological Institute, who sort of, this is their mission, what can we do to be more of a resource to patients and families?
I think by continually asking that question. I don't think that's for me to answer, but the fact that you're taking that feedback, I think that's what will, honestly what people need. And I think having more discussions like this, I don't know how often you do this, but maybe, maybe it's a monthly check-in with the community. And, I think you brought us in because we all have different lived experience that give us some form of expertise, but we're not the only ones. And so I think just maybe digging into the community you have and the people that are writing you that are looking for maybe meeting some of the resources that you may realize that you don't have because you keep getting letters about X or Y or Z. But the fact that you're asking that question, I think everything is already in the right direction through that question. So yeah, cheers to all of you and to the parents. Tom, I just want to say, I really do appreciate your perspective, and I hope you don't mind my respectful, pushback on a few things, but I think, it takes great fathers and mothers like you to, it starts with the parents. And so I just want to take a moment to honor Tom and the parents here and Kathleen's family. Yay.
Yeah, you're nice. Thank you.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, we have a question in from one of our colleagues, Dr. Amit Kumar at Burke Neurological Institute. As Tom mentioned, an empathy from the community is really a welcome move. As an immigrant from a developing nation where there are not enough resources and there's a lot of stigma attached to it, what are the best ways to approach their issues? So I don't, is there anybody who'd like to answer? So basically, Amit is from a different country and, how do you address these needs? Maybe perhaps when,
Yeah, I think it's, it's unfortunately local, right? I mean, it's, it's, we can't have, I'm not sure what we can do to impact other, governments around accessibility, right? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think that, you can obviously advocate within your own country and advocate within your own government, your own structure, right? I mean, that's what happened here, right? And it took a long time, but, we're a well-resourced country, right? I'm sympathetic, I may not agree with it, but I'm sympathetic to countries that it's not on the top of their list. They're trying to feed people, right? So I get it and I understand. That doesn't make it right. But I think it's a tall order. But we're behind you. Please start doing it. But it's not an easy answer.
I'm even curious too about the stigma part. Like, what can we do as fellow countrymen or friends, neighbors, family members? How can we help demystify, destigmatize, differences? And I'd love to hear from the three of you on what can we do?
I could jump in here quickly to say the first thing that came to mind on an international scale is, let's pass the CRPD through the UN, which would basically give ADA-like rights on an international scale. I think that would be the first thing. But then, of course, implementation is another thing. But you know, one of the things that I try to do when I talk to cab drivers from all over the world, you know, is not police them on their language necessarily, because they may not have grown up with that. However, you know, they will ask me questions. I remember a driver saying to me, but don't you want to dance? Don't you want to walk? Don't you want to swim? And I happen to do all three things. So I said, well, I do. And so, you know, in terms of, you know, obviously the international folks that I get to meet here, that's the way I can advocate for stigma, is just sharing my own story of what's possible and hoping that that opens their mind to what disability looks like and feels like. And but I think, you know, let's start advocating on an international scale. I think CRPD is a great place to start, and have our leaders, people in leadership, talking about disability in progressive ways, and not just the leaders that have kids with disabilities or have a cousin with a disability. Let's get everyone talking about it. Yeah.
Xian, can you just tell us, for those of us who don't know, and I'm one of them, what CRPD is?
So it's Convention on the Rights for People with Disabilities. Every year they have a meeting about this, and often there will be quite a lot of people who vote for it, but it's never quite enough to actually pass it on an international scale. So Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities is what CRPD stands for. And lots of my friends go and advocate for it, but it's just, we're still a bit short in terms of votes to make it an international law. But yes, I hope that clarifies, and maybe we can all go to the UN together and advocate for this next year.
Yeah.
Let us know where and when. We'll party at my house, and then we'll go and make we'll make a day of it. Kathleen, did you have anything to share about stigma?
Yeah, I really think the best thing that Xian said is personal encounters. So I have a lot of friends who tell me that when they first met me, they really didn't know what to make of me. But now that they know me, they're talking. So it's like really getting to know people. So maybe also for international, it's to have. I would love to see more people with disabilities in the media, and not necessarily like in the media as a disabled person, but just in the media as a person living their life. I feel like those sorts of things might also help decrease stigma if people realize that having a disability is really it's not all who we are. It's for we're people, we have interests, we have annoying habits, we have all kinds of, we're real people. So I feel like the media can help all of that too. And I can reach the whole world.
Good point.
Kathleen, I just want to agree with Kathleen wholeheartedly. I actually think your answer is way better than mine, because no, but let me explain why. I think media is in a way more powerful than laws. Lots of laws get passed and then I mean, we saw this with segregation, right? It didn't mean that necessarily, even passing those laws didn't necessarily mean that some places complied. But I think in terms of stigma, having those examples out there of authentically cast or first person narratives of people with disabilities and their families, I think that if it could reach an international audience, that's one of the biggest ways to smash a stigma without even saying it. You can do it through laughter. You can do it through heart and love. And I mean, I think that's what we saw with Coda. That's what we saw with Peanut Butter Falcon. That's what we saw, even with the series Love on the Spectrum, those kinds of things. Hopefully, if they're being broadcast internationally, that's the start of a lot of change. So Kathleen, I agree with you more than I agree with myself. So that's why I'm saying your answer is really powerful and important.
Tom, is there anything you'd like to add about how we can help?
No, I think these guys covered it, and I agree. And Kathleen, I don't think you have any weird, idiosyncrasies at all. Like, so.
Weird is good.
The other thing, so many people on this meeting have been amazing about sharing resources from makeup to furniture. And I wanted to ask if somebody needs to go to a one-stop shop where they can find these resources, can you guys tell us where to go? Where do we go?
I don't know. I wish I knew. I mean, I unfortunately have one-stop shopping for, like, disability tools like ramps and wheelchairs and seats and bars. So, like, infrastructure, items are pretty well organized within the commercial community. But for what you're talking about, I'm not aware of them, but maybe I'm not the best person to ask either. But it'd be great to have shoes, makeup, food, all these things in one area. I don't know that exists, but if it does, I'd love to hear about it.
I know that this. Oh, sorry. I know that the Cerebral Palsy Foundation has some lists, but yeah, there is. I'm not aware of the major list, so we need that.
Yeah, I'll just echo that. I don't know of one list where everything it is, and maybe we should create that. But I will say for Zappos, they at least started with Zappos Adapted started with just really comfortable shoes. And they've done a singles program. So for anyone, I drag my left foot. And so my left shoe always, it doesn't matter how beautiful the shoe is. No shoe lasts me because I used to only be able to find one pair at a time that would fit me. I would have to, this is before online shopping, I'd have to scour a Payless or something, especially when you do break your shoes in. I was scared to spend real money because they would have holes in them within 2 to 3 months if they were good shoes. And sometimes with really cheap shoes, it'd be a month. And so I did want to let people know there is a single shoe program through Zappos. They started last year that you can, buy 5 of the left. That's what I wish I could have done as a kid, just buy 5 of a left shoe that I really liked so I could keep it a lot longer. But other than Zappos, I don't really know of resources in a universal sense. I will say there's a lot happening in beauty. Unfortunately, I can't talk about, I'm working on 3 or 4 different projects, but NDAs are involved. So I do know that beauty is making progress. I do know that I think fashion has been ahead of beauty in a lot of ways. I want to hear from Tom where this one-stop shop is for the ramps and those please, share, because the fact that we don't know, I think there's an opportunity area there. But I hope that happens really soon.
You're absolutely right. It's a huge opportunity area. And for all those entrepreneurs out there, they've got sure, why not? Why can't we do it? Why can't we do it? And you know, maybe even have BNI host something that can be a one-stop shop, you know. So we're going to work on that. You've all inspired me. And then I guess I just wanted to echo, because there was a woman who shared in the, I believe it was a woman who shared in the chat, Jay Burles, and I just want to sort of bring this to everyone's attention. It sounds to me like in her chat, you know, she's having struggles when she has to, maybe her disability isn't so obvious, and so, you know, talking to her close friends and families members about difficulties when they're not so obvious, you know. And I thought maybe you guys could share some advice with Jay Burles about, you know, how do you have those conversations? Obviously you said listening is like a huge thing. So how do you have those conversations?
I feel like I'm talking a lot, but you know, I've talked about this a lot because my disability is very apparent, right? I've got 2 shiny ski poles. People stop me all the time. We have conversations. And so it forces you, you're like a debutante that's out without, you know, the ball. You just get thrown into, you know, especially having grown up with my disability. I'm quite used to that. And then you have people with invisible disabilities where they're almost feeling, in a lot of ways, they have to prove disability, or they feel neglected, or they have to decide when to out themselves or how to do it. I think actually, in order to have those conversations, the first thing you need to do is own it fully, because I will even say, as obvious as I was, I realized later that there were some layers of denial that I went through being in what was called mainstream schooling. You know, I would kind of downplay some of the things that made me different in order to connect with others. And I had to realize that it was actually through full ownership that I could advocate and do these things. You can't really, part of what helps in terms of being able to, I say this with interview techniques. I'm doing a vocational series with the mayor's office for people with disabilities in October. And one of the classes is called The Power of Positive Language and Self-Esteem in the Workplace. And the reason I say that is, if you come into that conversation with layers of shame yourself, you know, I say this with parents too. If you have issues around your child's disability, your child will feel that. And so if you're talking to someone about, and it's a process, I'm not saying this is like, you know, that you have to be fully accepting and fully, you know, but in order to have an empowered conversation, I think you have to be clear on what it is for you before you can really talk to someone in a meaningful way about what it should be for them. Because people tell me, in fact, yesterday it happened. I went to a grocery store and somebody said, "Oh, what happened to you?" And I said, "Oh, well, I have cerebral palsy. I use these for balance, but it's the blessing of my life." I defined it before she could, because she was starting to say, "Oh, I'm sorry." And I'm like, "But I'm not sorry. So it's okay." You know what I mean? So I think maybe it's not necessary wherever you are. I think it's owning the narrative first when you have those conversations, so that you don't let someone else define you. That's an ideal, obviously. Everyone's in their own process and layers of denial or acceptance. And so that's not saying that if you're not there yet, you shouldn't have these conversations, but just be aware that the language you use will also influence how the conversation goes.
That's on that insightful, incredible, and inspiring note. I think we are gonna wrap up for today. I want to thank our incredible panelists, Kathleen, Tom, and the whole Hamilton family, and Xian Horn. This has been an amazing discussion, and I will take the bold move of saying thank you on behalf of everybody who attended, because it's just been incredibly helpful and insightful for us, and inspiring, incredibly inspiring. And I want to also thank BNI for hosting this panel, and I think we've all learned a lot, and we also have some things to take back for BNI to do to continue to help raise awareness and make positive contributions moving forward. So thank you all very, very
Thanks for
much.
having us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.